Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on when the video catches you. Just want to talk a little bit about a area today, and you saw the title, and I'm going to get off into what I'm talking about shortly. But many of you know for the last couple of months or so, I've been releasing a video once a week around Monday at 6 a.m. And that's a little bit out of the ordinary for me because I normally do a video maybe once a month or once every other week. And so if you don't get any videos every week for the next month, for the rest of the year, no worries. I'm still available, just probably getting back to my previous schedule. But I might still release them every week. I'm not sure, we'll just see how things turn out. But I just want to talk about this topic of color, racism, colorism, caste, CASTE, inclusion, and exclusion. And as Black Americans, many of us out there, we want to say that white America treats us bad because of our color. Asian Indian culture treats us bad because of our color. Latino Americans treat us bad because of our color. And I'm going to be honest with you. I've been treated bad by all of them because of my color. I've been discriminated against by all of them because of my color. But you know what? That doesn't make me look at all of them the same way, because I know you got idiots in every race. And so you can't do nothing about the idiots. But the biggest problem I see, and the even sadder thing is we can't call it racism among each other, but we'll call it colorism in the Black race. Now, that's the even sadder thing. So I'm going to talk about colorism from the position of social, educational, political, and I might touch on a few other things because I want to point some things out, because I know we're so busy looking at division because the system is geared to keep us focused on white versus black. But Marco Polo, in his travels, he talked about the Asian Indian culture. And he said during his travels to India, he noticed that they would anoint their babies with sesame seed oil or sesame oil. And he said the reason they did it was because they knew that sesame oil would make their skin darker. And since they believed God to be black, they wanted to be as close to God as possible. Now, that's amazing to me because I've seen a lot of them exhibit those racist characteristics toward the American black. And like I said, nothing is ever 100%. Like I said, you got idiots in every race. And they look at us like, what's our problem? But they're basically the same color as us. It's amazing how that works. But a guy named Samuel Hayakawa said back in 1941 that the decision accepted by the United States that any person with even a small amount of Negro blood is a Negro. And logically, it would be exactly as justifiable to say that any person with even a small amount of white blood is white. Why do they say one rather than the other? So as I stated, I'm going to inject some politics in here. I'm going to inject some educational stuff in here. I'm going to interject some social stuff in here because it's an area that's been affecting us for a long time. And we can't see it because all we see is black versus white. I'm going to even get into your fraternal organizations and your sororities in college. And we all know that. You got certain fraternities that accept one group of people. You got certain fraternities that accept another group of people, and sororities the same way. But when we look at the political division among the blacks, we can see something if we're really looking. That's anything. If we're looking hard enough, we can find whatever we want. And if we can't find it, a lot of times we'll make it up. But take people like Clarence Thomas, J.C. Watts, former super great quarterback out of Oklahoma University back in the mid 80s. You take Alan Keyes, Condoleezza Rice, and J.C. Watts was also a Republican congressman out of Oklahoma. Alan Keyes was the ambassador to the United Nations in the Reagan presidency. Condoleezza Rice served under George Bush administration. First woman that ever achieved that position, black woman. But we overlooked her. But we praised Valerie Jarrett and Susan Rice. Amazing how that works. You look at Herman Cain, former CEO of Godfather's Pizza, who recently passed a few months ago. Alan West, lieutenant colonel and former congressman. And those are just a few. Other than being Republicans, what else do all of these folks have in common? Every last one of them is a dark-skinned person. Now, I have a couple of questions. Did they become Republicans because their thought process and ideas were not in line with mainstream Black America? Or were they rejected for their ideas because they're darker skinned? And you look at guys like Walter Williams and Thomas Sowell, and as far as I know, both of these guys are libertarians. And these two guys are intellectual giants. But most black folks ignore their ideas and their thought process. Now, why is that? I mean, I respect these guys greatly because these guys make you think. Now, we are going to be hard pressed to find another duo who could compete on an intellectual level with these two guys. Is it because they think differently than mainstream Black America? Or are they rejected because they're dark skinned? And the reason I say that is because we need to think about that because Colin Powell is a Republican on paper. But black folks have always loved Colin Powell. Now, you know what I'm getting ready to say, don't you? Powell is light skinned. Now, you know, Harry Belafonte had some negative things to say about Colin Powell some years back, but we can overlook that. So Colin Powell was loved by Black America even before he endorsed Barack Obama for the presidency. Now, Kamala, I'm not certain how she pronounces her name. I've heard it so many ways. I've even heard her say it a couple of different ways, so I don't know. But she's partly black. Her dad is 1/8 black, which actually makes her 1/16 black. I mean, grew up under a Hindu heritage, but okay, we'll go with the one drop rule that white America has actually put in place. Barack Obama was born to a black father and white mother. Dwight Eisenhower was the son of a white father and a black mother. Shirley Chisholm was a product of two black parents. Stacey Abrams is the product of two black parents. Alan Keyes is the product of two black parents. So when looking at who would have the experience to actually ascend to the vice presidential position, Abrams is better qualified. But why did Harris get the nod? When we're looking at a guy like Alan Keyes, you're going to be hard pressed to find another black person who has the constitutional foundation of an Alan Keyes. But, and since I'm on the subject of politics right now, it was not only whites in the Democratic Party who didn't want blacks to vote. See, it wasn't Republicans that didn't want us to vote, and it wasn't Republicans who took the right to vote away from us. It was Democrats. And I have some other videos where I talk about politics and all that. And I even have a whole chapter in my book, But Hey, What Do I Know? Which is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or directly through me, myronjones@gmail.com. And you can get it autographed from me. Can't get it autographed from Amazon and Barnes & Noble. But I talk about the political thing, so I'm not going to spend too much time on getting off into all that. But it wasn't just white Democrats who didn't want blacks to vote. The bougie black class didn't want what they termed uneducated blacks to vote either. But now that we've solidified ourselves behind Miss Harris, we've kind of been lulled back into a sense of complacency. And I'm going to get into that some more, but most people don't know that Malcolm X actually voted for Barry Goldwater because he said he would rather vote for the fox he knew than the wolf he didn't know. which was LBJ. And LBJ said we got 200 years keeping y'all in control, and we only have 144 left to go. Now, we knew what Trump stood. Well, at least we thought, or at least we think we know what Trump stood. And sadly, we know where Biden stood. But we overlooked that because Biden was Barack Obama VP. And do your own research and start figuring out why Biden was picked. But, I'm not getting into all that. Like I said, you got to do your research. You can either do the research or you can choose to remain lazy and ignorant. That's your choice. And if you take offense to what I said, I heard years ago, the dog that hollers was the one that got hit. I'm not talking to anybody directly, personally. I'm making a video. But if you mad about what I'm saying, you the one got hit. So I'm talking to you then, if that's the way you feel. But a few years ago, in the NBA Finals, there was a huge mix-up among black folks about the darker skinned team or the lighter skinned team, and which team was better and had the better athletes. Now, when we look back to the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama, we're automatically taking Rosa Parks. That's what history wants us to focus on. That's what the NAACP wants us to focus on. But before that happened with Miss Parks, a teenager named Claudette Colvin had done the exact same thing about a year before and received no press. Now, we're going to focus on these two, but there were actually 4 other black women who had done the exact same thing long before Claudette Colvin had ever done it, long before Rosa Parks had ever done it, going back to the 1800s when a woman refused to give up her seat on a train because she was sitting in the wrong section. Do your own research. But just like Rosa Parks, Claudette Colvin was also a member of the NAACP. And according to the NAACP, they didn't want to press forward on that particular case of Colvin for 2 reasons. Now, like I said, that's according to them. And those 2 reasons were she was a teenager and she was pregnant at the time. And Claudette Colvin was 15 at the time. And she was apparently pregnant by some grown man. So they said they didn't want that in the press. They didn't want to lose the credibility. But we'll go with that. But this is what Claudette Colvin said. And Claudette Colvin actually said that she did not have the look that the NAACP wanted to represent them. Parks was light-skinned. Colvin was dark-skinned. You can find a video where she said it herself. She's a grown woman when she was interviewed on that. And there's a Chinese proverb that says, learning is like rowing upstream. Not to advance is to drop back. And you heard me state in another video that a dead fish can go with the flow, but it takes a strong fish to swim against it. Now, if we're going to change some things in our race and in our culture, we are going to have to stop going with the flow of mainstream Black America. Because mainstream Black America don't know what the hell they doing and don't know what the hell they talking about. Now, you call me what you want, but some things have to change if we're going to get better and things are going to improve for us. A few years ago, a classmate of mine actually told me I needed to stop thinking like the small percentage of blacks and get back to thinking like the other 90%. Now, he basically told me I needed to not think for myself, because that's what he does. He can't think for himself. If you say anything, you can go out there and post on social media that the sun is beautiful today. And his response is going to probably be, well, 220,000 people have died under Trump because of COVID. Because that's just how dumb he is. And I said it because he has no foundation. He has no background on anything. He just like to spit off what everybody else that's uneducated and uninformed is spewing. So I'll put it this way. He and I graduated high school together. But for 4 years, he and I never had any classes together. I was always in classes where numbers were small. And the people I was in class with were classified as the top 10% of the graduating class. So if I've always been in a small minority, why would I change course just to fit in with people who don't think like me? The system, this American system, is not going to allow a black person with 2 black parents to be elevated to higher positions like president and vice president. It doesn't matter if that black person identifies as a Republican or Democrat. The system fears that should a black person with the 2 black parents from birth get elevated, they might possibly abandon the party politics and start trying to promote a black agenda. So the system gives us an illusion of progress by allowing a mixed race person to represent us and speak for us at the higher levels of politics. Now, I guess I'd call her a friend, but I saw her post something the other day. She said, if my daughters need a woman of color to look up to, they can look up to me. They don't need to look up to anybody else. And I agree with that position 100%. You stop pointing your kids to other people outside of your household. What have you been teaching them all these years? And I'm not going to say all the other stuff that she said, but I'll just leave that there. But as blacks, we're okay with this process of who should be allowed to represent the race. Why did Colin Kaepernick, a mixed race man, get the nod to represent us for police brutality against blacks? The kneeling had nothing to do with the flag. And white America needs to come off that. It had nothing to do with the flag. He was protesting the police brutality and police injustice and the system injustice and all that. But why did he get the nod to represent us? Every black person who's been politicized and publicized in these incidents has always had 2 black parents. Why has Shaun King, a mixed race man, become the voice of black America? This hasn't just started. Black eugenicists have always been among us. Chandler Owen and A. Philip Randolph, and these guys were back in the early 20th century. Some of you might be familiar with their names. But these 2 gentlemen said that intermarriage was the only logical, sound, and correct aim. And see, they had a system in place back then, and matter of fact, it's still in place now. Whereas they chose who actually got to represent the race. We have black secret societies that promote this agenda in politics at the university level, and it's called fraternities and sororities. And many blacks who become part of these organizations have no clue what they're actually joining when they pledge. All I remember hearing when I was in college was if I pledged and went over, my job prospects would greatly increase upon graduation. And people always want to be part of something fun and great and things like that moving forward. So, that's how they captivate you. That's how they get you to join. And so, in a sense, it's a modified form of nepotism, because upon joining these organizations, the individual becomes a part of a new family. And for me, I was able to subscribe to the methods these low self-esteem of individuals placed upon new recruits to make themselves feel better, to see who would bow down and worship them. If you have to do this type of stuff that dehumanizes you to become part of something, I have some questions about you. I don't subscribe to the slavery identification system called tattoos to show my allegiance to the organization. I didn't buy into the humiliating aspects of playing along just to be part of something. I'm a part of an organization now, a business organization, and I had to do none of that stuff. I don't subscribe to that foolishness. I don't like people to humiliate and dehumanize me. But hey, do what you do. Some things just were never for me. And I remember in college, and I mean, I guess it probably changed now, but you had one organization of dark-skinned males, and you had one organization of dark-skinned females who would only be allowed, and they only allowed dark-skinned people into their organizations. Then on the flip side of that, you had the lighter skinned male organization and lighter skinned female organization. And the only way you could be allowed in was to be light skinned. We used to call them the pretty boys and girls. We used to call them the dark skinned, the roughnecks, and I forgot what we used to call the females. But you get my point. Television does the same thing. Think of the Cosby Show. And I mean, everybody I know loved the Cosby Show. That was a big thing when I was in college, and you know, we hated the nights that we would actually have class when the Cosby Show came on. And you had the two oldest daughters who happened to be light skinned, and the two younger daughters were dark skinned as well as the son. And then you also had the spinoff show, Different World, which showcased the light skinned female as the female focal point, and all the surrounding female cast was mostly dark-skinned women. And if you look at many of those dark-skinned women in the shows, they were beautiful. But what did the show focus on? The light-skinned female. And everybody was always trying to get the light-skinned female's attention. Now, transition to the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. We would also see this take place. I mean, it's right in front of you if you pay attention and you stop. It's not good to watch TV shows and movies with me because I'm looking for all of the hidden messages that are being presented. And so my granddaughter was here one night and she told me and my wife, let's watch a movie. So we started watching the movie. And I'm sitting there telling her what's getting ready to happen next. And she had seen it already. And she said, can you stop analyzing the movie and just watch it with her? But the original mother in the Fresh Prince was a darker skinned woman. And she's a pretty woman. And the oldest daughter was light skinned, who always had plenty of male suitors vying for her attention. Now, there are different accounts of what happened on the show. But we saw the dark-skinned mother replaced by a lighter-skinned actress. Now, you contrast that with the earlier shows like Good Times, which featured a darker-skinned family, with the exception of the youngest son. He was what we would call fair in the black race. And the family was considerably poor. And I want y'all to remember what I said. You look at Fresh Prince, you look at Cosby Show, you look at those shows, and you look at the makeup of the family, then you look at Good Times and look at the makeup of the family, and then I'm going to say something a little bit later that makes sense and put that in perspective. But, sure, we had the Jeffersons, which was a spinoff of All in the Family. And although George Jefferson was a rich black man, look at the role he was cast in. He was a loudmouth, arrogant type of fellow who was actually openly disrespected by his housekeeper, which happened to be a black woman. But the even sadder thing is his wife allowed her to continue to disrespect her husband. And we see that a lot in our race. And there's a young lady, Shalita Grant. I came across her one night. I was flipping the channels and the show NCIS New Orleans was on. And then next thing, I guess the episode I saw was the last episode she was in. And so I looked her up online and she did an interview and she actually talking about how black women are cast in Hollywood and how they are selected based on being able to pass the white society test of colorism. She talked about how hard it is for darker skinned black women to get roles in Hollywood. And I mean, think about how long Viola Davis has actually been around and look at how long it was before she actually became what we would consider mainstream Hollywood. Now, we talk about our HBCUs and how great they are, but HBCU enrollment has been down for the last 20 plus years because as much as we say we're pro-black, We're trying to do everything we get into pro-white universities. But in the early 20th centuries, in through some parts of, 1/4 of the way through, 1/4, 1/3, somewhere around in there, HBCUs would only accept an application or review an application if a picture was included. And the reason behind that was because so they could see what the potential applicant looked like, the potential student. If that applicant was dark skinned, the application wouldn't even get looked at. It will be automatically rejected for admission to that school. And the color system went across every type of black organization, educational, medical, and social. So it really disturbs me how black folks continue to complain about how other races treat us, but we do the same thing to each other, which makes it worse. Because we're all in the same boat. We're all struggling to try to get ahead. And we're trying to do everything we can to make sure one group of blacks doesn't advance. And in 1899, our great champion for black causes, who was also of a mixed caste, W.E.B. Du Bois, he did a study which classified black families into 4 categories. Now, amazingly, we let a guy who was never a slave, we let a guy who went to school with white philanthropy come out and be a spokesman for the race. But do your research, you'll see he was chosen too. But the first group he talked about was actually composed of families that had undoubted respectability in society, which means they were men who would not work in menial or service jobs. In translation, low pay. And those wives didn't work outside of the home. And they were considered the cream of the black crop. And according to Du Bois, they would be considered the most eugenically sound. This would be your talented 10. And the second group was actually consisting of what they would call respectable working class, but the wife worked outside of the home. And even though the wives were working outside of the house, they were still considered to be moral, clean, and they still had and maintained a large degree of social responsibility and respectability. And the third group is what he termed the working poor, who was considered to be honest, but under no circumstances would they ever be able to pull themselves up out of poverty. And they were, all of a sudden, it came to this point where he was talking about this class of people that all of a sudden their heritage was one of hereditary. Now, the first 2 classes he had nothing to say about. They were born that way. But all of a sudden with this group, he said they were born that way. And Du Bois said they didn't have the ability to progress financially and socially because they lacked energy and self-determination. Translation, you're lazy. And see, what he did mention was those first 2 groups had always gotten handouts from white America. And the last group, he considered them to be the criminal element. He called them the germs of the race. And if he were living today, guess how many black folks he would consider germs of the race. Now, do your own research. And so this group of people, he said they were in the class of prostitutes, criminals, and the criminal element. And they were also degenerates, according to Du Bois. Now, the one thing that, as I mentioned, the talented 10 never told anyone was that they were being educated off of white charity. And because of this, they felt that they were the chosen people of the black race. Now, the ironic thing is these black bougie class didn't even realize what was happening to them. And, I mean, you can talk to them today. And if you know how to communicate properly, you can hear it in their conversation. And the ones who are not part of the bougie class, they pretty much take marching orders from the bougie class because you can hear it in their conversation. So The black bougie class, as I stated, didn't realize what was happening to them. Because of those white dollars, everything they were being taught was in direct contradiction to any type of racial uplift. Many of the black colleges were receiving white dollars. And by receipt of those dollars, they had to teach what the benefactors told them to teach and which career paths blacks had to choose. Why do you think we had so many black teachers back then? Chew on that for a little bit. Hampton University was to create more preachers and teachers, as if we need more preachers. And Booker T. Washington complained about that long before then. Howard University was to create our doctors, lawyers, scientists, and intellectuals. And go back and study Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge said, stop giving all that money to all them white colleges and start giving some of that money to them black colleges too, said, because they have a lot to offer. But Calvin Coolidge didn't want the money to be given with conditions. And a guy named Charles Hamilton Poe, he was a journalist back in the, I think he started his journalism career in 1899. He was born around 1863, I believe. But he said when whites funded black schools, it was done with the control of the black race in mind. So you see, we don't know what we don't know. White philanthropists decided which HBCUs would actually be the control centers for Black America. And those schools are Howard University, Spelman University, Morehouse University, Atlanta University, Fisk University, Meharry, Dillard University, and there was also this medical facility called Flint Goodrich, which was a hospital that was affiliated with Dillard, and they received dollars too. And most of this was financed by a guy named Julius Rosenwald, who was actually the president of Sears and Roebuck at the time, along with a guy who was actually in charge of his finances named Edwin Embry. And then the General Education Board, which was a Rockefeller-funded organization, donated money for the land and the buildings for the exact same universities that Rosenwald had actually funded. And then there was something also called the John Slater Fund, which was actually given out by a Methodist bishop named Atticus Haygood and a Democratic politician and Confederate officer named Jabez Lamont Monroe Curry. Now, ironically, both of these men supported slavery, and Curry never wavered from his position that all Negroes remained immoral, ignorant, and indolent. Now, Howard, Fisk, Tuskegee, Atlanta, Clark Atlanta, Dillard, and Lincoln University actually introduced eugenics into their curriculum in the 1920s because they felt it would become an easier route for assimilation and racial uplift. We don't understand how deep this stuff goes that has actually shaped us as a people, but we think we're doing good. Now, many other organizations such as the Bureau of Social Hygiene, the Laurel Spelman Rockefeller Memorial, the Rockefeller Foundation, which was actually a prelude to the National Science Foundation and National Institute of Health. And they actually had a hand in shaping our thought process to the detriment of our race. And the National Institute of Health was heavily involved in eugenics. So, like I said, do your research. I'm just throwing stuff out there for you. Now, we've heard of white flight, which means when any community gets 8% of black families, whites are going to move out. But we also have black flight, which means black must keep following whites into whatever neighborhood they go to. But that thought process actually started 15 years after the Civil War had ended in 1880. Upper crust blacks had actually based their status in society on how many ties they had with prominent whites and how light their skin was and what type of family they came from. And then we want to get mad when a white person say, you know, one of my friends is black. Those blacks didn't want to be identified with the lower class blacks. And they didn't want that identification because they wanted to be acceptable to white America. Now, whenever white America rejects them, then they want to come back to the black people they ran away from and then talk about we one family. Get the hell out of here. You didn't think about me when you left me. But this whole color and caste system basically came about because these uppity Negroes felt like dark-skinned blacks was still in a primitive state. Primitive. Now, what did these older books and thought processes, Birth of a Nation, things like that, address us as? They said we were still akin to apes. You remember the picture of King Kong and the white princess on the cover of that World War I magazine cover? And then LeBron James and Giselle Bundchen recreated the image. So why did LeBron James have to be put in the same exact image and position as King Kong from that World War II poster? And what color is LeBron James? He's dark skinned. So we got to understand these things. So the uppity Negroes felt like the lowercase Negroes, lower class Negroes, were basically still monkeys. And they felt like anyone with an ounce of white blood had to be advanced beyond the rest of them. Now, ironically, white America still saw blacks as the same. Didn't matter if you had white blood or not. I mean, think about the slave owners going in and raping the black female slaves, producing offspring, and then sending their offspring right into slavery because they had black blood in them. Man, these people sick in the head. So white America still looked at white blood, black blood or not, ounce of white blood. You got black in you, you black. Unless and then they use that to get us back to sleep again. If you understand what I'm saying about being complacent when certain ones of us advance. And so white America didn't care about the mixture of the two races when it came to skin color. And it would also be during this period that we would get our black leaders would emerge. And the reason behind this goes back to what I just said. They wanted a certain class of blacks to speak and represent the entire race. And under this system, the only way to improve your lot in life was education. And a separation from the unacceptable blacks socially. I've already told you who the unacceptable blacks were, according to them. They also felt that the different grades had to separate in order to ensure that there would be no possibility of the different groups, dark-skinned, light-skinned, educated, uneducated, hooking up and reproducing children, therefore minimizing the effectiveness of the higher class of blacks, according to them. They call this selective breeding. Now, think about that term, selective breeding. We've heard the stories about slave masters taking the healthiest and strongest black male and taking him from plantation to plantation to impregnate the other female black slaves so they can produce more brutes for the slave system. That is selective breeding. Now, in Women and Children of the South, which was an article in a birth control review, Chandler Owen said that fit blacks, and he's not talking about athletically fit blacks, but intellectually fit blacks. And he said they should be the ones who produce more children. And the unfit blacks, y'all dummies basically, he fixed it up real good, needed to utilize whatever methods available to keep them from having children. Which was why Margaret Sanger went to your black leadership and promoted eugenics within the black race. And the black leadership, which included a lot of your black pastors, took those ideas into their congregation and promoted that idea to the church. Now, white America appointed black leadership has always wanted to destroy what they term unfit black offspring. And I don't even think it's unfit black. I think it's all black offspring. Because you look at who founded Planned Parenthood, and it was called something else when Sanger was living. But you go and think about a guy named P.W. Botha, who was a former South African president. Find out what he said in 1985. You go back to King Herod in the Bible, when King Herod said, kill all the male Hebrew babies. See, your preacher ain't told you that them Hebrews were black. They keep telling you we're Hamites, but we're Hebrews. And Pharaoh said, kill all the black male Hebrew baby. It wasn't black, but he said kill all the Hebrew babies when he knew Moses was out there. So this has been going on for a long time, and now they give, and since it wasn't happening fast enough, they gave you Planned Parenthood legislatively in 1973 to give you the right to go do it on your own. And we've actually destroyed more life on our own than any other people combined. So do your research. Alice Dunbar Nelson wrote in a 1920 essay that was titled Women's Most Serious Problem. And she said that educated Negro women overwhelmingly preferred economic independence and earning potential rearing children. And we do see that play out in our race right today. The great majority of women getting abortions are not those who have multiple children. Most of the times it's those who are considered the upwardly mobile black women who do not want a child or childcare interfering with their careers. And you know, a few years ago, that was a big mix-up about Oprah and Condoleezza Rice ascending to their levels in society that they had, but they weren't married and didn't have kids. Did you ever consider the fact that neither one of these women might not be able to have kids? I mean, that never crossed your mind? All we know how to do is criticize. We love Oprah for everything she's done in society, but we hate Oprah because she don't have kids and she's not married. I mean, Oprah's dark skin, ain't she? Condoleezza's dark skin, ain't she? I mean, we overlook all of Condoleezza Rice's accomplishment. You know, one, because she's a Republican. Two, because she never married and had kids. I mean, we some messed up in the head, folks. Now, if you go and research some archives of old black publications, magazine articles, and all of that stuff, in every publication there is actually an ad in there for skin whitening cream for blacks in order for them to better assimilate into society. And the ads actually said that I pulled a lot of old publications, some publications we've never heard of that were black publications. And I even found some of the archives of the ones most of us know about today. And the whitening creams win that. Now, the bleaching creams ads actually portrayed light with being feminine and beautiful. And a few years ago, you saw, and I think down in Jamaica and over in Africa, that had become a big industry again. I mean, if you look at the makeup that's really being put out there for women nowadays, it's almost all white. I mean, you can look at a woman's face and her face doesn't even match her neck, where they used to be able to do that real good. But now the makeup is going back to all this white stuff again. And so white cosmetic companies consider dark skin as ugly, and we do it right today ourselves. Straight hair, meaning white, was considered to be the best case of social evolution. And many black women, regardless of class or status in society, actually got away from braiding their hair and actually plaiting it up. You know, we just see that a lot. You know, back in the 70s and 80s, we see a lot of black men plait their hair because they said plaiting the hair actually made their hair grow. And so when white companies consider dark skin as ugly, guess what our black women who were dark skinned started believing about themselves? They believed they were ugly. And I mean, all shades of our women are beautiful. But dark skinned women started to think of themselves as ugly. Now, our black mixed race felt that the only blacks who should be able to represent the race were those who only had white ancestry, because it actually gave them intellect that pure blacks didn't have. Remember what I said about the politicians earlier? See how your so-called black leaders think about you? Ain't nothing changed. They felt like the white portion of their racial makeup gave them the right to govern and manage the pure blacks, which is the same thing was told of grassroots blacks who attended the 1964 Democratic National Convention. And you go back and do some research, and you'll find out what society actually believed about white people centuries ago. And these are not things I wrote down. These are things I've studied. Nobody respected or revered white people because they said they were liars, they were thieves, they cheated, they didn't bathe but once or twice a year because they felt like sweat made their skin soft and supple. I mean, I'm not making this stuff up, folks. I'm telling you what I've researched. But most of what we call a black leader has always been chosen by white America. All it is a slavery system all over again, where the slave master would actually appoint black overseers to watch over other blacks because they had better things to do at the time, instead of them having to watch blacks directly. They give them a few crumbs off the table, and the day they give them a few dollars. They pay them pretty well, above standard of society, and interject in their thought process in their system, and then the so-called black leaders spit that stuff right back out to us, and we think they're doing it on our behalf. And the only thing they keep spitting out to us is black versus white. We can't do any better. We're victims over and over and over again. And see, one thing I've learned when I've studied blacks is, and anybody, it's not just blacks, but true leaders are always marginalized by other blacks. Because as much as we say we don't want to be oppressed, we want to be oppressed. And the last thing an oppressed person or people want is somebody that was formerly oppressed with them gaining any edge over them. If white America chooses the person, we secretly believe the person is a credible leader. But if a person works hard and brings great ideas to the table, we don't want them to lead us or even assume the position as a leader. And those who work hard are not trying to be a leader. They're trying to uplift everybody, which is what a leader does, but they're just trying to uplift everybody. And our problem is we want all blacks to remain in that Egypt thinking. Now, Egypt is a place of bondage, be it mental, physical, or spiritual. And many of us just can't break the yoke of Egypt. And because many of us can't break the yoke, we don't want anyone else in the group to become unhinged from it either. Because if they become unhinged, they say, we got to stick together. But if they were presented the same opportunity, they'd burn rubber on you in a heartbeat. Keeping company with the type of people who are filled with the spirit of Egypt will actually restrict and prohibit you from attaining freedom. You can't hang out with Egypt-thinking people. Deliverance is not freedom. What is deliverance? Well, I'll put it this way. Deliverance is like being locked in a prison cell. And one day the guard comes and he opens the door up to the cell and he tells you, you're free to go. You step out of the jail cell outside the building, but you are so attracted to the facility that you don't want to move no further than the grounds. You have a few dollars in your pocket, and there's a bus stop right in front of the prison, but you choose to just hold on to the money and watch several buses pass you by. You've been physically freed, but you're still mentally bound. And I think the mental binding is worse. See, the Hebrews that left Egypt had been in bondage for so long that they considered it as their livelihood. Now, it's the same thing when the Hebrews were freed in America in 1865. There were many who desired freedom and did everything in their power to enjoy the shackles being removed. But then you still had that other group, and we would term those the real house Negroes. The house Negroes, and house Negroes are not all bright skinned today. You got a lot of dark skinned house Negroes because they still buy into the Egypt thinking. But they were in love with the master and everything the master provides. And so right today, you still got a lot of them want all of their sustenance provided by somebody else instead of going out and creating their own livelihood. President-elect Biden has put a task force together, say he want to shut down the economy once elected for 4 to 6 weeks, and then he wants to put a stimulus package in place to pay everybody, not just the people that's not working, but he wants to pay the small and medium-sized businesses too. Y'all don't understand that plan, do you? But you're going to have to study that to understand where I'm going with that. So the house Negroes work with the former master to destroy the progress of those who didn't want to sit around waiting on handouts. And as you can see from the information I provided so far, we're fighting many battles on many fronts. And as much as we blame outsiders, we have some work to do in-house. Sure, others have done great damage to us, and I will never, ever deny that. I mentioned to you in the beginning of the video how I've been mistreated and discriminated against by whites, Hispanics, and Asian Indians. So I know it exists, but I don't let that hold me down. I'm mentally free. They might be doing some things physically to try to do damage to me and other blacks out there, but I'm mentally free. That's more powerful than the physical slavery. And I mean, I presented the information here, but we keep claiming that we want to be unified. But the ones always clamoring for unity are the exact same ones who keep running to outsiders for approval. And then when they don't get the approval that they seek, then they want to run back. But then when they come back, they want to say, well, you know, this is what we learned over here. And so then they want to try to lead what they term the less educated and the darker skin. But they got rejected, but they want to come back and act like they were friends. Now, how many of our major pro-black organizations, well, let me say it this way. How can one of our major pro-black organizations not have a black president for almost 70 years after they founded? They didn't get their first president, I believe, 1975, 66 years later. And so you have to ask yourself, why is that? Why have other groups always financed and funded all of our major movements, even today? Who do you think financed the Civil Rights Movement? Who do you think financing the Black Lives Matter movement? And who do you think financed the feminism movement? And the feminism movement wasn't a black female movement. But if you listen to Gloria Steinem, she said it was black women. But if you do your research, you can see it was white women. And they just used black women. And they preyed on the black women in a feminine, emotional state to get the black women to leave their husbands, put their husbands out of the house, and assert themselves as equal in society. And I mean, in the spiritual realm, we're equal. But the Bible even says in the physical realm, the female is the weaker vessel. So I don't want my wife to be as strong as me. I want her to be a woman of strength, but I don't want her to be as strong as me. See, there's a difference in the two. And you got some women out there that can teach you that stuff, you know, because I know a lot of women say, well, you ain't a woman, you can't teach that. But I have a woman of strength who can. But she doesn't like to talk and she doesn't like to hear her voice and all that. I mean, her voice is what captivated me. But that's neither here nor there. But haven't we figured out yet that when outsiders finance our activities, they control our activities? I mean, even you go back and look at the March on Washington, find out who controlled that. But as I've always said, we talk a good game, but when it comes to money, all of a sudden it's like my grandmother used to say, you can hear a mouse pissing on cotton. Now, if we don't change our course in our minds, we're going to still be complaining about all the exact same issues we're complaining about in the future. We're going to have to weed out those who place themselves on a higher level based on skin color, which are also many of the same ones who keep promoting us as victims. Alvin Toffler said, the illiterate of the 21st century refusing to learn anything new, unlearn, and relearn. And I mean, that's a powerful statement. The illiterate of this century we're living in will be those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And here we are in the 21st century, still refusing to learn anything new than what we were taught. We're refusing to unlearn that bad information that we were taught. And we're still refusing to train the mind to relearn something new that could benefit us. And he also said that change is not merely necessary to life. It is life. So, are we going to work to change, or are we planning on staying on the same course, which has not produced any positive results yet? Billionaire Mark Cuban was recently interviewed, and he said there was one ultimate skill we needed to teach our kids. And that was, we've got to teach our kids how to learn. See, the school system is teaching our kids what to learn. He said we need to teach our kids how to learn because that's the only ultimate skill going forward. We're going to have to stop teaching our kids the same old things that we were taught because it hasn't worked for us. We love the quote about insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. But for some reason, we keep doing the exact same things over and over again and expecting different results. Why 90% of us still voting the same way after 56 years and still blaming the Republicans for all our problems? Republican, you ain't voting for them. Mark Cuban, I love to put my mind in people who have success. I don't care what color they are. If they're living at a degree of success, I want to know what they know. But in 2018, Mark Cuban said that he reads 4 to 5 books a day. Now, I'm pretty sure, he might be doing audio reading or whatever, because in most cases, you can probably get through a book in about an hour, depending on the book. I have a lot of books it takes more than an hour to read because some books are 600, 700, 800 pages. I have some books that are even 1,400 pages. So you're not going to read 4 of those per day. But on average, you can probably read the average type book in a day, within an hour, excuse me. Because they're normally between 130 to 200 pages. So you can read a book a day if you really put your mind to it. All you got to do is turn off a TV show. But most of us don't want to do that. And Mark Cuban reads 4 or 5 books. I'm not going to say I read that many a day, but I will have 3, 4, 5 books at a time in different parts of the house. And if I'm in that part of the house, I'll open that book doing some idle time. So I'm reading in about that many books a day. I'm just not completing that many books in a day. So I've never calculated how much time I spend reading. I also learn a lot from YouTube videos. And when you have discernment, you can filter out a lot of the stuff that you think is fluff and stuff that you say, oh, that doesn't sound credible. I need to do a little bit more research. I don't just take everything I learn off of YouTube and books and everything and consider that the source. I cross-reference that with about 5, 6, 7, sometimes up to 10 different sources before I even share the information. I learn a lot from webinars and podcasts. Now, Cuban said that he recognized that learning was truly a skill and that by continuing to learn to this day, he is able to compete and keep up and get ahead of most people. What are we putting in our minds that's going to allow us to compete, to keep up, and get ahead?